Hi, welcome to a new video in my series on expat life. Today we're going to talk about renting an apartment versus buying a house. So sit back and enjoy. Hi and welcome to another video in my series about expat life. Today we're going to talk about where to live in Denmark. So renting an apartment versus buying a house. But just to first tell you a little bit about myself in case you are new to my channel, my name is Kelly and I'm an American expat who lives in Denmark with my Danish husband and our 2 children. We live in rural Jutland, which is the peninsula part in the middle of Denmark. And so we don't live in Copenhagen. We don't live in a big town. We live in a small town. And so my experiences of moving here and living in an apartment, living in a house, the whole process that we went through for all of that, it's based off of small town living. So keep that in mind throughout this video. I'm not an expert on Copenhagen and I have no idea really about what it's like to live there. Okay, so let's first talk about renting an apartment versus buying an apartment. If you buy an apartment, then obviously it's going to cost more money and it's something that you're going to be kind of stuck with until you can sell it. So in my opinion, if you are new to the area, focus on renting an apartment. You might be coming with a large family and a lot of stuff. I know all about that. But for us, it was important for us to get to know the area, to figure out, is this the town I want to live in? Do I want to live in a bigger town? Do I want to live in an apartment? Do I want a house? What is it that I want? So renting an apartment for the time being, when you're making that transition from your original country to your new home in Denmark, it really allows some time for you to kind of get to know the area. So please, in my recommendation, rent an apartment. And you might be thinking, what's it like to rent an apartment in a small town? Well, there are plenty of apartments in small towns. There are lots of different locations and lots of different types. There are buildings with multiple apartment units. There are apartments where there's 3 to 1 building and you have your own entrance and they're side by side or they're one on top of each other. So there are a lot of different options of apartments in small towns. But how do you go about finding an apartment when you're moving to Denmark? Well, if you are moving here because of a job, I would recommend talking to your job about helping you relocate. Maybe it's that they have some housing where they can host you for a little while so you're able to make this transition, or they have access to other places that might be interesting to you. My husband's company has some homes that they rent out to expats or people who are making a transition, but unfortunately for us, they weren't large enough. And they weren't large enough on a lot of scales, but for us, I am here on a family reunification visa, and at the time I was in the process of getting my visa approved. And one thing on the visa is that you have to prove that you live in a big enough living environment. And so for me, the housing that his company provided, it wouldn't have worked with my visa, so we needed to find something else. So if you are coming here for work, in a work visa, it probably doesn't matter so much for you. But if you are here on a visa, you really want to make sure that you check all the requirements before making some final decisions about where to live. But one website that we used to help us, because we didn't know the area and we didn't really know anybody who lived there, was boligstellen.dk. And I'm putting the link to it right here because it sounds maybe a little different than the way that it's spelled, especially if you're an English speaker. And at this website, it's a search engine for different places. You can find homes, you can find apartments to buy, apartments to rent. So an apartment is a livelihood. And you can also search a map to see how many are in the area and look at prices and different things. We asked that my husband's company help with this, and they actually found the apartment for us and made the arrangements. We did not know what it looked like to begin with. We didn't know where it was located. We didn't really have any information. We just knew that the size was right. So that would have been okay for the time being. Again, I wasn't looking for the home to last me a lifetime. I was looking for a transitional spot. And that's what we got. So what's required when you are going to be renting an apartment in Denmark? So again, we're talking about maybe renting in a small town. There can be a lot of similarities to living in a big city, but I can only speak from experience. So one thing that you need is you need a CPR card or a yellow card. And this is kind of like your social security card in a way. You need to have this card in order to get an apartment. So your apartment application probably won't get approved until you have it. So that's something you want to get right away. If you're coming to Denmark because of a job, they might be able to help you with this process. You need to have 3 months deposit before you move in. So it might seem like quite a bit upfront, but be aware of that. And of course, it's a deposit like any other apartment in any other country, like in the US, for example. We would pay a deposit and you would get it back if there weren't any major damages to your apartment that they needed the deposit for. It's the same thing in Denmark. But also don't forget to look at your visa requirements. So if space is a factor in that, make sure you know what amount of square meters you need to be working with. What happens when you want to leave your apartment? Maybe go to another apartment, maybe buy a house, maybe, I don't know where you want to go. You need to give them a 1 month's notice ahead of time to say that you're leaving. So the apartment that we had was 90 square meters roughly. And we were coming from a house that was 2,400 square feet in the United States, which kind of changes to be about 220 square meters. So 220 to about 90. And it was a very hard struggle at first. So if you're like us, you know, you're a family with a lot of things, you're 4 people, how do you fit into this space? Of course, we didn't have anything when we first moved in. We bought some things from the secondhand store because everything was on a container in a ship in the middle of the ocean on its way over here. And so we bought table settings for everyone. We borrowed cots to sleep on. We borrowed different things. Again, my husband is Danish, so it was a little bit easier to borrow from some friends and family. But I highly recommend going to somewhere like IKEA, where things are a little bit cheaper. They have a store here called Bilka, which is kind of like a Walmart in a way. And they also have a lot of really good stuff at their secondhand stores. I would really recommend going there because you kind of want cheap before you get your own stuff. It's only for a short period of time. So we lived for a month with very few items. And then when our stuff came, we had this huge truck and it just all got kind of shoved into the apartment. And there was just boxes everywhere. It was like a maze. We had no room for the stuff. So that might be something that happens to you. So what I would recommend is get to know your neighbors and ask them if they know anybody that might have a barn where they would rent out storage spaces. It's very common in small areas for there to be barns that have been kind of converted into storage areas. Don't be looking for them online because you won't find them. Word of mouth is the best. And we found one that was within a mile of our apartment. It was perfect. And it really didn't cost a lot of money either. Funny things about moving into an apartment in Denmark. I don't know if this is standard, but it was kind of a shock to us, is that there were really no lights in the apartment and no blinds or curtains. In the US, these are things that kind of come standard. I've lived in a few different apartments and a house. Of course, you lived in houses growing up as a child as well, but I know that whenever you move into a new place, there are blinds or curtains always on the walls or on the windows, and there's always on the ceiling a light fixture. It was a bit dark for a while in our apartment until we figured out what we were going to do about that, because we had a light above the stove, and I think there was one in the bathroom. So we really had 2 lights, so that was it. So it was it was a little interesting. But the secondhand store was where we went to get lights, and it was good enough. And luckily our small town had kind of a hardware store, so we were able to get a few things that we needed for that as well. What do you look for when you are looking for an apartment? Well, that would be the same anywhere. If you lived in the United States, if you lived in Denmark, of course you're going to be looking for size. Again, think about visa requirements if that's your thing. You're going to be looking for a location. How far away is it from where you need to be? Like maybe the grocery store, the train station, your job. Are you able to have your car there? That's such a nice thing about having an apartment in a rural area. It's not a hard thing to find a place for your car. Maybe not so many people have cars that live in big cities. A lot of people ride bikes. A lot of people ride bikes in small towns. So do they have a place for all of that? But are you easily able to get to places? Our apartment was at the top of a very large hill. I compare it to maybe something in San Francisco. It was very, very steep. And so if I were to go out, I would ride my bike a lot of times. And really wanted to make sure that I was getting all of the errands done as much as I could, because I did not want to go up and down that steep hill more than once if I could avoid it. So obviously the location wasn't the greatest, but again, when you look at a map, you have no idea the elevations. So we're thinking, oh, that's not that far from the city center. And oh yeah, I can ride my bike. Oh, the kids are gonna be close to this. Yeah. What I mentioned before is that maybe you have the option of buying an apartment. Again, I really would not do that. If we think about what is the cost of living in Denmark, the cost of living in a big city is very different than the cost of living in rural Jutland. So if we're looking at a small town, like where we first moved to, you have an apartment that we moved into, 90 square meters-ish. It's anywhere from 5,000 to 7,000 kroner. And when you think about what that is in the US, that's around $770 to $1,070. And so, yeah, that's maybe not so bad. If you were to buy an apartment, that could be somewhere around 600,000 kroner. And so there's a big difference there, and you're gonna have to sell that when you want to move out, and that could take a long time. So 600,000 kroner is roughly like $92,000. Maybe you sold a big house in the US and you have some money, but I would really try to make your expenses not so much in the beginning when you move to a new place. The biggest city closest to us is called Aarhus, which is the second biggest city in Denmark. So that's where a lot of action is. That's where a lot of museums and cafes and restaurants and different things are. We think it's a nice place to go, but it's not a place that we would want to live. For the reason is that we like living in an area where we have a lot of open space, a big house, and a big yard, and getting to know your neighbors and different things. You know, to each its own. I've never really lived in a huge, tight city like some of these, so it's just not something that was appealing to us. But if you were to move to a place like Aarhus, the cost of apartments and housing obviously is going to be much higher. So what is it like to buy a house in Denmark? Well, actually, I am not experienced in finances at all. I am the least experienced person in finances, so I'm very happy to have the husband that I do who understands all these number things. But when we were looking into buying a house, we attended a workshop for foreigners buying a house. Yes, he is a Dane, but he also lived out of the country for quite a few years, and he's bringing in an international spouse. So we kind of wanted to see what restrictions maybe there were. I kept the, brochure about that with a lot of details for mortgages and all these things, and I am attaching it in the details. So it's a couple of years old, but it might give you a better idea, obviously, if you're a number person, because I am not. So, when you're buying a home, you of course need to have money to put down. That's going to be the same in any country. But what else do you need when buying a house in Denmark? Well, you actually need to get permission from the Ministry of Justice to buy a home. So you have to send them a letter requesting permission to buy a home. You will not be able to buy a home without this permission. You also need to prove that you are going to be using the house for personal use. It's not something that you're buying so that way you can rent it out and make money, or you just want to buy it so you have an address. They're going to be making sure that you're actually living in that house. And then you know that when you buy a house, you normally have to work with a bank. It's a little different here because once you contact a bank and you tell them that you want to buy a house, you have to get a letter from the bank before you can make an offer on a house. So when you go to the bank and you tell them about yourself, maybe you've set up an account, maybe you meet with someone, some type of account manager, they will send you a letter back telling you what you are approved of to spend on a house. So it's not just saying, I'd like this much money to buy this house. They're going to be evaluating how much money you would be getting from the bank. And so then you can use that as, okay, then I need to find a house that is in this price range. So they narrow it down for you. They want to make sure that you're not living beyond your means, which is kind of a good thing. Obviously, again, you need to have the CPR card in order to buy a house. So once you've registered as a resident in the communa after you've lived here, then you need that in order to buy a house. And as a person looking for a house, you would normally in the US contact a realtor, and the realtor would kind of go through the whole process of finding things for you and taking you on visits and whatever. But in Denmark, the realtor usually only works with the seller. So if you want to find a house, yes, you can still contact a realtor company and they will take you on to places and everything. But when you find the place that you want to buy and you want to make an offer, there's no realtor there in your corner to go through the paperwork with you and to explain things and to make sure that everything is just as it should be. So it's really important to get a lawyer. But once you found the place that you want to buy, make sure that the seller makes available the inspector's report to you. And there's going to be some things where it's labeled K1, K2, or K3. And K3 are bad. So the whole paper is going to be filled out with one of these 3 labels next to it. And you want to make sure that it doesn't have that many K3s. It's probably going to have something K3, especially if you're buying an older home. We bought an older house because we liked the space and the location. Obviously, some things on the inside were a little ugly and outdated and needed changing, but the price of an older, uglier home might be a little bit cheaper anyways, but the amount of house that we're able to get compared to someone living in Copenhagen or in Aarhus, for example, you just can't compare it. We get so much more space. So pros and cons there. So what do houses cost in rural Denmark? Well, again, like I said, we came from a house that was 2,400 square feet, which is about 220 square meters. And we wanted to find something that was similar. You're not going to find places that have like multiple garages. I mean, they're out there, but we had a 3-car garage, we had a shed. We're trying to be realistic. The types of houses that you're going to find here are very different from maybe where you've come from before, and that's just fine. But when you look in a small town, again, a lot of the houses are older. Yes, you can find a newer home, but the prices are going to be much more. For a house that resembles somewhat of what we left in the US, so maybe something that's close to 220 square meters, you're going to be paying anywhere from 1.2 million kroner to 3 million kroner. And again, you're thinking, oh my gosh, that's a lot of money. But when you think about it in American money, that's about 185,000 to about 460,000. Yes, that's a very big difference. Does it need a lot of work? Is it in a bad location? Sometimes you can get large, cheap homes that are in the country because the location isn't so great. But I guess it's really just all works for you. If you choose to live in the rural part of Denmark or in a small town, then maybe living on a farm or something like that is appealing, especially with having all the extra space. If I think about living in different neighborhoods in the US, Obviously, if you live in a smaller town, the prices of homes are much cheaper than living in a big city. It's very similar to living in Denmark. Now, if we're to compare that to a bigger city on Jutland, in the peninsula part, like Aarhus, which is the second biggest city in Denmark, you're looking at something that's more close to 7 million kroner to about 15 million kroner. And again, that's not all houses in general. That's the same size house that I was talking about before, roughly about 220. There are plenty of people who don't live in houses this big. So you might be thinking, oh, I don't want that. But maybe if you're a family of 4 or 5 or 6 or something and you want a bigger home, then obviously it's going to cost much more money. So what is that in the US? That's about $1,075,000 to $2,300,000. That's a lot of money. So hopefully if you've come here with a really good job, with a really strong income, if that's something that you're interested in. And who knows, if you live in a bigger city, you may have a bigger income. So these are just some insights on really what is it like to live in Denmark as far as apartments or houses. We bought an old house in a small town, and it's older than I am, and when we bought it, it had brown on brown bathrooms and a powder blue bathroom, and yeah, it just has this kind of smell to it in different places. So we've done a little bit here and there to change some things, but there are some things that are fantastic. We have a beautiful backyard, and we have a great neighborhood. It's really nice to get to know your neighbors. In a smaller place, I feel that it's kind of nice that my children can get to know a lot of people and get to know them well, because you know, we see them often. And they go to a Danish school, so I think for us it was important to kind of create this sense of community that we were maybe lacking a little bit, because we're moving to a place where we didn't know anyone and we don't have any family. My husband's family lives far away, 3 hours or so from us, so we don't see them as often, and we don't have a lot of help integrating so much. And so it's been very nice to have small town neighbors who are just really warm and welcoming. I know a lot of people live in Aarhus who I know from Facebook groups and things, a lot of other expats, internationals who move to Denmark because there's much more going on. There's the university, and there's a large hospital in Aarhus. There's movie theaters and restaurants and all kinds of different things, shopping. We have some things here, but really not a whole lot. We try to use what we can from our own town before going to another town. We also live on the train line, so I could easily go to Aarhus if I wanted to on the train and not have to worry about things like parking, because parking in big cities sometimes are nightmares, especially trying to figure out how to work the machines and things like that when your Danish isn't the greatest. But I think overall it's not a very difficult experience. Again, if you really want to know a little bit more about the finances and a lot of number talk, you can check the description for the link of the article that we were given. I think it was like a PowerPoint presentation, but it has a lot of information. You can also contact someone from a bank, maybe the bank in the area where you feel like you're going to be living, and maybe reach out to somebody and say, I'm an international moving to the area. Do you have any information, pamphlets, literature, or something that you could share with renting process or buying a house? But again, if you're coming here with a job, reach out to your job to kind of help you with the transition of settling into Denmark. I hope you found this video informative and maybe it's answered some of your questions about how to go about getting an apartment, or maybe how to go about getting a house. If you have any questions for me, please leave them in the comments, and I'm really glad you stopped by. I'm so excited for new videos that will be coming up next week. Every week I'll be posting a new expat video, and be sure to subscribe to my channel so you can get access to those videos. as well as check out some of my other videos of places that we've been to. I'm also the creator of the blog My New Danish Life, which you can see from the link here. And if you go there, you can see I've written some personal testimonies of what it's like living here in Denmark. There's a whole blog on our first apartment, which you can see pictures of it, and yeah, craziness about that. And there's also a lot of blog posts. What are some of the fun family activities that we found since we've moved here? We also are campers, so we're starting a new camping section, so go ahead and check that out. But I'm really glad you're here, and I can't wait to share more with you. So have a great day.